Well, happy Friday and happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there, including my dad. So he gives me that last name. It is Greg Bishop, Bishop on Air. Appreciate you guys joining me each and every Friday, each and every weekday. We're here. All right. Programming note, might be kind of spotty next week. I am taking time off from my full-time gig at the Center Square and Illinois Radio Network. After covering veto session, I need to unplug a bit. But, of course, we will obviously check in from time to time. So stay tuned. We've got plenty to get to. A recap of what happened at fall veto session, including the latest in gun ban litigation. So that's on the way here with Bishop on Air.
Answers to questions like, number one, is the state going to seek other methods of prosecution if the county jurisdiction does not prosecute? Number two, who is going to be responsible for confiscation of firearms if the state determines that to be necessary? And three, finally, is the state going to revoke FOID cards even if the charges are dropped by local prosecutors?
And this is...
Seriously, I would recommend that you look at the website. I have no idea, right? I mean, this is something that we didn't support. It's ridiculous. This is unconstitutional.
Those are just a couple of the Republican voices yesterday on the final day of fall veto session about where we're at with the state's gun and magazine ban. Welcome in, Bishop on Air. Happy Friday. Like, subscribe, follow along anywhere on all the social medias. Just search Bishop on Air. Yesterday was the final day of fall veto session, and we'll obviously touch on a lot of what happened yesterday, including a discussion about shell bills. Because we see this happen time and again, happened with the gun and magazine ban. It started out as a bill about insurance, and then it was gutted and replaced in lame duck session and ultimately passed within just a matter of hours, and kaboom. You've got a gun ban with a registry that's opened October 1st and a January 1st deadline to register, or you face criminal penalties. This is obviously something that is of major concern for thousands of people out there across the state of Illinois, if not the millions, 2.4 million firearm owners ID card holders that are registered with the state as firearms owners. But as we've seen, after 5 weeks into the gun ban registry, it's only about 2,900 people have registered. That's 0.12% of total FOID card holders. Now, I know not everybody has a FOID card, has a weapon, but interesting to kind of see some of those stats and the comparisons. But as we get ready to hear some of what was talked about yesterday with the last day of fall veto session at the Illinois State House, we've definitely got to review the latest in the courts. And let's go ahead and take a look at the filing from Thomas Magg in the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Because remember, this happened last Friday, where the Seventh Circuit, they went ahead and said, we vacate the lower court's ruling, which had a preliminary injunction, and then they said the state has a likelihood of succeeding on the merits of defending the state's gun and magazine ban. Well, yesterday we told you that attorney Thomas Magg, who represents Jeremy Langley and others in the Southern District case, he filed for en banc review from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. So we knew that filing was made, but we hadn't had a chance to look at it because it wasn't made public. Well, it was made public. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is, of course, a request from Magg representing these individuals to ultimately have the full court look at this. So remember, the Southern District had several cases. Thomas Magg representing the Langley case, he was actually the first one to file in state court, but it was transferred to federal court. And then you had other cases filed in federal court, like the State Rifle Association, federal firearms licensees, and others. They had their cases all consolidated in the Southern District with Stephen McGlynn, judge. McGlynn, he decided that there should be a preliminary injunction against the law from being enforced. So that was issued late April, only lasted 6 days before you had the case appealed by the states to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. While that was going on in the Southern District, you had the Northern District cases. where there was Naperville and Chicago individuals suing those localities, but also suing the state for the gun and magazine ban. Several cases, Northern District judges said the state has a likelihood of succeeding on the merits. So in those district cases that were consolidated, they went to the appeals court. The appeals court got both the Southern District and the Northern District, combined all of these cases, heard that case late June with 3 judges, only a 3-judge panel. And then they had the case for about 4 months. This is after the U.S. Supreme Court had already been asked by the Naperville plaintiffs, Law Weapons, to review the case expeditiously. But since the Seventh Circuit said, we're doing this as quick as we can and rocket docket and all of that over the summer, the Seventh Circuit maintained control of that after the Supreme Court said, go ahead, Seventh Circuit, do what you got to do. So they heard the case, and then 4 months later, you have a ruling come out that vacated the lower court's ruling and said that the state has a likelihood of succeeding on the merits. So what about these merits? The merits really haven't been determined yet. Now, you've got several options down in the Southern District where Mag himself has a case about vagueness, and that's being debated by Judge McGlynn. He has yet to issue a ruling on that. They've already heard oral arguments on that. But then you have the federal firearms licensees of Illinois who've also amended their initial complaint in the Southern District to say that the registry needs to be blocked while the court case plays out. And while they were getting ready to file their preliminary motion for an injunction in that case in the Southern District, that's when the Seventh Circuit dropped their appeal last week, or dropped their ruling on the appeal last week. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So, options in the Seventh Circuit. Of course, you've got Illinois State Rifle Association saying that they're going to try to take their case right to the Supreme Court. Thomas Mag, though, he's going not to the 3-judge panel, but to the full panel en banc for this particular ruling. And that's before you go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So there's a couple of different options here. And obviously, this is very much still up in the air with tons of questions. But let's go ahead and look at the filing here from Thomas Mag at the Seventh Circuit to look for an en banc appeal. And I just want to go through. Of course, he cites a bunch of cases, talks about the rule that allows for an en banc review, talks about the background of the case and how 170 different firearms are made illegal, and you've got these plaintiffs that feel that their rights are being violated, their Second Amendment rights, 14th Amendment rights, and so on. Goes on to talk about how these are now considered because it's got a threaded barrel, it's a assault weapon. And looking at some of these examples, even rifles and shotguns that have a thumbstock hole. So you've got questions about that. Is that really a quote assault weapon? The petition for a panel hearing talks about the rule. Petition for a panel rehearing must state with particularity each point of law or fact that the petitioner believes the court has overlooked or misapprehended, and must argue in support of the petition. Goes on to talk about, quite simply, the panel misapprehended the word arms and what the term is used for in the Second Amendment, and in the process excluded those common firearms most useful for self-defense, which at the same time of being they're common today. And they're literally, the technology is the same as those of the descendants of the firearms that are being, quote, banned. Or being defined as, quote, assault weapons. So it goes on to talk about the Second Amendment, elevates above all other interests the right of law-abiding responsible citizens to use arms in defense of heart and home. That's according to Heller. Goes on to say that the Supreme Court clearly holds the Second Amendment protects guns commonly owned by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. At the same time, the Second Amendment confers an individual right to keep and bear arms that have some responsible relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. A weapon may not be banned unless it is dangerous and unusual. And I think that's important. It's not dangerous or unusual. It's dangerous and unusual. If Heller tells us anything, it's that firearms cannot be categorically prohibited just because they are dangerous. So it goes on to cite Bruin as well, where the Supreme Court held when the Second Amendment's plain text covers an individual's conduct, the Constitution presumptively protects that conduct. The government must then justify its regulation by demonstrating that it is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulations. Second Amendment states in parts, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The amendment presents several conditions in that plain language. Goes on to lay those out. But I want to get to something here on page 12 that I picked up briefly, and this is 110 pages plus. It goes on to say that the crux of the discussions here of the panel opinion, the 3-judge panel, was that we find substantial support for the proposition that arms protected by the Second Amendment do not include weapons that may be reserved for military use. This, of course, is another way of saying that common, ordinary, but modern firearms can be banned because they didn't exist in 1791. Fortunately, the Supreme Court's already told us twice, contrary to Friedman, that this is not the law. It goes on to say, in fact, Heller in itself rejected and as bordering on the frivolous, the argument that only arms that exist in the 18th century are protected by the Second Amendment. But this frivolous argument is the conclusion of the panel. So that's why he says it needs to be brought up on the en banc panel. There's questions as to how these the entire panel could rule. But listen, I mean, there's questions been about this whole thing since January 10th when it was enacted. How is it going to be enforced? You've got sheriffs that have said they're not going to enforce this. You've got state's attorneys that said this is unconstitutional. They're not going to enforce this. Across the state, like 90 plus, we've got 102 counties in Illinois. 90 plus have said they're not going to enforce this. So who is going to enforce this? State Representative Brad Halbrook yesterday on the House floor, he raised substantial questions about all of this and laid out his questions that are still remaining and how the legislature is getting ready to leave for the year. And the January 1st deadline is just around the corner. Here's State Representative Brad Halbrook.
Thank you. Representative Halbrook, for what reason do you rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A point of personal privilege, please.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this past week, the Illinois State Police held several public hearings about the Protect Illinois Communities Act, also known as the Firearm Ban and Registration Bill. As I stated in my testimony at ISP's first hearing, there are more questions than answers when it comes to the issues of enforcement. When this law was passed, we immediately heard from over 90 county sheriffs and state's attorneys that they would not enforce this law. The governor, however, has tried to make a claim that the counties have no discretion in prosecution and arrests related to the failure to register firearms and possession of legally purchased firearms before this new law. Here's the problem. The Illinois State Police has gone on record multiple times now stating that the issues of enforcement, they believe it will be up to the counties to decide what to do with the charges when the state issues a violation. Once again, this leaves more questions than answers. Folks, we are less than 2 months away from the enforcement date of this act. Right now, this means we are less than 2 months away from the state of Illinois making felons out of thousands of law-abiding citizens. The people deserve answers that this body, the governor, and the state of Illinois have yet to give them. Answers to questions like, number one, is the state going to seek other methods of prosecution if the county jurisdiction does not prosecute? Number two, who is going to be responsible for confiscation of firearms if the state determines that to be necessary? And three, finally, is the state going to revoke FOID cards even if the charges are dropped by local prosecutors? Are we going to have thousands of people with revoked FOID cards next spring for simply exercising their constitutional right to bear arms? It seems once again the legislature and the governor have failed to get on the same page and have no regard for the stakeholders' responsibility for enforcement. I fully intend to submit further questions and testimony to the Illinois State Police and JCAR on this matter. I know I'm hearing from thousands of people across the state whose response to the tyrannical government is this: we will not comply. Thank you.
Clearly, questions mounting, and
for what reason
clearly questions continue to just not be necessarily fully addressed. And one way we've seen them being addressed during these public hearings, and again, we've covered all three of them. If you look back at the channel, you can see the highlights. If you want to watch the entire hearings, you can go to the Illinois State Police website and watch the WebEx recordings. But ultimately, you heard time and again, refer to the website. Go check out the frequently asked questions. Listen, I get it. Frequently asked questions websites are great. But that's not necessarily binding law, is it? You can go through and read the rules, but the rules that state police filed for the gun ban registry really, in many instances, just restates the state law, which people have questions about. What needs to be registered? What's considered an attachment? What's the process of enforcing this? State police say go to the website, check out the frequently asked questions. That's not a legal document and can change on a whim, quite frankly. Now they say they're hoping to try to get a pathway of sorts of showing what's the latest information with the firearms regulations or the answers that state police are providing about the firearms regulations. But is that a legal document? And again, will it hold up in court because of how it can change on a whim? So these are substantial questions that really haven't been answered. So while it's still being challenged in the courts on multiple levels, not just the Southern District, but also back at the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals and soon to be at the U.S. Supreme Court, you've got the rules in place, and that January 1st deadline to register, people will become felons overnight. So I asked the House Minority Leader, Tony McCombie, for her thoughts on how thousands of people, especially legislators, going home for the winter, for the rest of the year, they're not back until January 18th, or rather January 16th. So what about these firearms owners? How are they going to be impacted by the gun registry that's very much in full effect unless a court strikes it down or unless the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules suspends rules next month?
Apparently, are either going to destroy those or they become potentially felons January 1st.
Are they?
Well, I mean, so far, the 2,900 people have registered a month in, 5 weeks in.
Yeah, there's a lot of question with that, isn't there? So I would recommend that you review the ISP website.
How's your?
But if you could though, I mean, tongue in cheek aside, this is
No, seriously, I would recommend that you look at the website.
How's your?
I have no idea, right? I mean, this is something that we didn't support. It's ridiculous. This is unconstitutional. It's so obviously unconstitutional. This is going to be, if this does not quickly go to the Supreme Court, you are going to make law-abiding gun owners felons. But are you? Because who's going to come knocking on their doors and come take them away? I don't even know how this is going to work. And who's going to come? I just don't even know how it's going to work.
So clearly you've got the issue of, the question of constitutionality, whether or not it's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court soon. Is that going to happen before January 1st? Are the rules going to be delayed? Clearly, we'll be tracking all of this because, we've got 7 weeks, less than 7 weeks before the gun ban registry deadline hits, and people could turn into felons overnight. We'll be tracking all of that. Be sure to follow me anywhere. Just search Bishop on Air, all the socials, and you can find me also here each and every weekday morning from 7 to 7:40ish to about 8:10ish or so. I know I was a few minutes late today, but no sweat. I'm doing this all. You're in my home, all right? So I appreciate you guys taking the time each and every weekday morning and hanging out. And just a programming note, might be kind of hit or miss next week. Just to let you know. I'm taking off of my full-time gig with the Center Square because I need to burn some vacation days before the end of the year. So I am going to be hit or miss throughout the week next week and do a lot of home projects and maybe even do some engineering here for the show as well. So just wanted to give you guys that heads up, all right? Stay tuned. We got plenty more coming up. It is Bishop on Air. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for tuning in. Hey!
Sure, this has nothing to do with physical therapy compact, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, just making sure everybody knows that. And you may see a kind of a similar line of questioning to the previous bill. I'm going to point out once again, what does this have anything to do with Veterinary Medicine Surgery Act?
Not on this particular bill, no.
Okay, I just want to point that out, and I hope we can work on changing that for future bills. Thank you.
So, State Representative C.D. Davidsmeyer, yesterday, final day of fall veto session, asking questions about bills that were coming up last minute that were not about what was the original subject matter of the bill. And that's a typical practice we see at the State House all the time, especially during these kind of end of session type of days. All right, welcome back. It's Bishop on Air. I'm Greg Bishop. Cover the State House for the Center Square and Illinois Radio Network. And I tell you, I haven't done this now for almost 10 years. It's amazing to watch how the sausage is made, and especially at the tail end of sessions. So just a quick overview of how the Illinois legislature works, okay? You've got two chambers, the House and the Senate. They have to pass legislation out of both chambers before it can get to the governor's desk for a signature. They are 2-year terms in the House. Now, the Senate has staggered terms, but ultimately you have what's called a General Assembly. That's the House and the Senate working together to pass legislation. The General Assembly has 2-year terms. So we just finished up the first of this General Assembly's 2-year term. So they're coming back next year for the second year of the 2-year term for the General Assembly. So all the legislation, the thousands of bills, I think they've got like 7,000 plus bills that they filed, if not more. I'll have to double check that number, but thousands of bills that have been filed in this first year. Those bills are still very much alive going into the second year term. Okay, so just so people understand. So when we're talking about this, just understand that a lot of this legislation is still very much alive and could come up before the end of the second year of the 2-year term. So some of the things that advanced in the spring, they got signed. There were, 665 bills that Governor J.B. Pritzker signed. He vetoed a handful. So for the legislative calendar, each year of the 2-year term, you've got spring session where they have to get a budget together. That's the main thing they got to do. And they got to do that by May 31st with a simple majority. If anything after May 31st is passed and enacted immediately, has to pass with 72 votes in the House and a supermajority in the Senate. So the political makeup of the legislature, you've got Democrats controlling both chambers, all right, with supermajorities. And, of course, a Democrat governor and Democrats office holders across the state. So Republicans are in the super minority. A lot of the legislation they file doesn't get heard. Some does. But sometimes you also have bipartisan measures that do come together. And one of those bipartisan measures that came together that was passed in the spring, but the governor vetoed, was a nuclear moratorium. We'll talk about that in a moment. Another bill the governor vetoed dealt with high energy transmission lines and allowing for Ameren, for instance, to have the right of first refusal to build those transmission lines. And so that bill passed and it was signed. It was a bipartisan bill and it was signed it was put on the governor's desk, but it mandatorily was vetoed. So they came back and said, okay, well, they're not going to go for the high transmission line right of first refusal. They're not going to try to override the governor's veto on that. But instead, they brought a different bill that had all the other underlying stuff in it. And it was a bill when they gutted and replaced this shell bill, right? Because here we are at the tail end of a session. A state bill has to pass through both chambers in order to become law. So when you have to do that and read a bill 3 times in one chamber, pass it, read a bill 3 times in the other chamber and pass it, then, if there's any changes in the Senate, that has to go back for concurrence in the House. So the bills can go back and forth. At the tail end of a session like this, a lot of times legislators will take what's called a shell bill that has, one line crossed out of it and the is changed to the. They pass that. They pass hundreds of those out of one chamber, so it's set up in another chamber, right? So that they can then take it from that chamber, gut and replace it, pass it back to the other chamber, and then they can just go ahead and voila, it's passed in a matter of 48 hours to a day. And that's what we saw yesterday with one bill in particular, a bill that was about the physical therapy compact. All right, look at this. I mean, the bill is, Senate Bill 1699. It's about physical therapy compact. And, didn't really have to do with that. Here is Larry Walsh Jr. He is the sponsor of this bill. Talks about what exactly is going on here.
With the floor amendment number 3 becoming a bill, this was the underlying language of House Bill 3445 without dealing with the right of first refusal. So the remaining portions that we voted on back in the spring would allow public universities to access renewable energy credits through the adjustable block program, requires the Illinois Power Agency to conduct comprehensive policy studies on a number of issues relating to energy transmission, procurement, and generation. And thirdly, it contains the wind siting trailer language that the Farm Bureau had requested when we passed House Bill 4412 out of the 102nd General Assembly. Happy to answer any questions. Ask for an I vote.
So some of the questions were, again, how the bill that's being voted on now has nothing to do with, what was it, physical therapy? Here's C.D. Davidsmeyer.
Just making sure this has nothing to do with physical therapy compact, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, just making sure everybody knows that.
Again, we see this time and again. And one bill, the gun ban, for instance, started out as like an insurance bill. And then they gutted and replaced it during lame duck session of the previous General Assembly, passed it in a day, and then the governor signed it that day, January 10th of this year, if you recall. Here is, the vote of that bill. Again, it had nothing to do with energy. It has the top line headline was physical therapy.
Present, and this bill having received the constitutional majority is hereby declared passed.
All right. So there you go. Another bill dealing with energy, the nuclear moratorium being lifted. This was a bipartisan effort that was brought about by State Senator Sue Rezin. She wanted to lift the language in state law that says there's a moratorium on new nuclear power facilities being built. That passed with bipartisan support in the spring. The governor vetoed it, saying it was too broad of language. He was worried about, large nuclear reactors being built. He wanted more small modular reactors built. So they brought about a gut and replace of a bill, and they went ahead and brought that up. And yes, indeed, it had nothing to do with nuclear power. House Bill 2473, a shell bill for veterinary medicine and surgery. Gutted and replaced and made a bill about lifting the nuclear moratorium. It'd be one thing if the bill had, something to do with energy, but it wasn't. It was, again, what is it? It's about veterinary medicine. So, all right. Here is some of the debate back and forth. You've got state representatives talking about what the bill is. And one in particular, State Representative Moeller, talking about this piece of legislation and how important it is to make sure to get it right.
Decarbonize our electricity grid and electrify our transportation networks. We are going to need energy options for the future. And I think nuclear has to be one of those options on the table. And again, appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into to crafting this legislation, the ability to take a pause and come back with a framework that ensures that we have regulations in place. And making sure that we got the right energy policies in place. A lot of this being driven because, and we'll touch on this with State Senator Sue Rezin after the measure passed. She held a news conference at the Capitol. You've got a lot of this being pushed because the state policy says we got to close coal-fired power plants by 2040 or 2045. And with that, what are you going to do to the electric grid? How reliable is it going to be? Just going to rely on wind and solar? The sun doesn't always shine. The wind's not always blowing. What are we going to do for baseload energy? You've got coal-fired power plants that have that baseload energy. Nuclear power plants have that baseload energy, but there's a moratorium on building new ones. We have these big, huge ones that are decades old that have gotten taxpayer subsidies in the past, mind you. So I think that, there's concerns on both ends. The environmental concern about what to do with the waste and also the taxpayer cost or the ratepayer subsidies that might have to go out for all of this. So clearly there's substantial questions about it, but still bipartisan support. However, again, C.D. Davidsmeyer needed to make sure to point out that people are clear that they're voting on a bill about nuclear energy, not about what was it again?
And you may see a kind of a similar line of questioning to the previous bill. I'm going to point out once again, what does this have anything to do with Veterinary Medicine Surgery Act?
Not on this particular bill, no.
Okay, I just want to point that out, and I hope we can work on changing that for future bills. Thank you.
Again, maybe change the shell bill process, or instead maybe changing the big board so it doesn't confuse people when they go to vote. All right, back to the substance of the bill, though. Nuclear moratorium being lifted. This is just one of the many things they were taking up yesterday during the final day of fall veto session. Ann Williams, she very much is a advocate for protection of the environment and looking at green energy. She supports this lifting of the nuclear moratorium.
I, too, voted against the original proposal, but today I will be voting in support, and not just because of my utmost respect for the sponsor. I am hopeful we will not need this proposal, and that technology advances and solid policy decisions around the energy space will preclude the need to develop additional nuclear power. I don't believe that nuclear power, with all its risks, costs, and costs, are the answer to our climate crisis or addressing our capacity needs. I do think it can continue to serve as a transition as we work to develop and grow our renewable energy resources: wind, solar, geothermal, sources of energy that are safe, clean, reliable, and renewable. We haven't talked much about geothermal, but it's growing and holds so much promise for building up our renewable future.
So geothermal now being talked about. You've had others who've said, hey, what about carbon capture and using that for some kind of energy source? We just saw the carbon pipeline thing being killed. They aren't going to pursue that, to have a CO2 pipeline pipe through like 14 Illinois counties to put it deep into the ground. That's another untested technology, so to speak. But windmills. Even in my community, as I head onto the highway, I see a little sign that says, get the facts, and it's got a windmill with a cross through it. I got to get more information about what's going on there, because that CO2 pipeline was supposed to go right through Sangamon County, not too far from where I live. So what's going on with these windmills? Do I want that, cluttered up in my backyard? Big dominating windmill. I don't want to be necessarily that fabulistic character who's tilting at windmills, but people have concerns about that. But State Representative Marty McLaughlin, he also talked about this bill, and in particular, just making sure that costs don't get out of control and people start getting bailed out.
Lance, I was thrilled when you brought this forward. And I think you remember what I said back in the spring. Absolutely thrilled that we're going to go down this path of clean, green nuclear energy. I just want to make sure that when the costs come forward, it doesn't clean all the green out of middle-class families' wallets, because we haven't thought about the size and type from a transmission perspective. But I appreciate your responses. Thank you.
So, again, McLaughlin, just making sure that people aren't, having to pay exorbitant amounts of money for all of this. Here is Lance Yednock, a Democrat who brought this bill in the House.
The experts predict
being asked questions by Representative Jimenez.
The experts predict how long that it will take for them to come up with this.
How long will the experts think it'd take to come up with a political solution, or?
Talking about waste.
Refine your question, please. I'm sorry.
Sure. So how long will it take for the experts to determine what the political solution and on the waste?
I would have to ask. Well, I don't know who the experts are. It's a political issue in Congress.
But on the scientific solution, can you repeat that answer?
Yeah, the scientific solution is to store the spent nuclear rods underground in the desert or other places like they do in some of the European, Scandinavian countries. It is a proven technique to keep that from harming anybody, because it is not a liquid waste. It is a solid fuel rod. And so we know the science behind it. The problem we have in the United States is we cannot politically get the spent fuel rods to Yucca Mountain or another depository, which the federal government is mandated to do, but it has been, much like many political situations in Congress, it's mired in partisanship at the moment. That's my best answer.
So in lieu of that, then what is going to be the resolution?
Well, the resolution right now is in the future, we'll continue to do what we do with all of our 96 facilities around the United States and store the spent fuel rods on site. And if the advanced nuclear reactors come to be like we believe they will, they could actually refine some of those spent fuel rods and eat up some of the fuel that way.
So that measure passed the House after the day before on Wednesday, passing the Senate. So they did end up getting that bill across to the finish line. We'll see it get on Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk for a signature. But again, this measure. It had nothing to do with nuclear energy, at least the title.
Have all voted who wish.
It was about veterinary medicine. So we'll see that shell bill process continue to play out. But again, that was a bipartisan bill. It was a measure that was originally brought by State Senator Sue Rezin in the Senate and then brought by Lance Yednock, a Democrat, in the House. Here is Senator Rezin talking about the importance of this, especially when it comes to grid reliability.
Well, as Representative Yednock said, our permit process to go to receive a permit for the new nuclear is 6 to 8 years before it's built out. So we're not talking this is going to happen in a year or so. And the concern is, to your point, that we do have coal plants going offline, especially in southern Illinois in the MISO system. MISO system has had red flags for the last 3 years. If you follow on the MISO app, there are red flags saying, warning, warning, we are very close to brownouts in southern Illinois. This is a very real circumstance. So we have to start preparing for that. Will we be able to backfill the coal with new nuclear by the year 2025? I think that's premature, but I do feel that by lifting the ban, it allows for new nuclear to be part of our portfolio by the end of 2029, 2030. So in energy space, that's not a long time. But if we wait any longer and if we didn't pass this bill, we would have just prolonged what we know is right around the corner, which are potential brownouts in MISO. And I will also add there was a report that looked at MISO, the reliability in MISO, but also PJM. And in the first time, we have seen in this report that they're concerned about, because of the premature closures of energy plants in PJM, which is in northern Illinois, they are concerned about reliability in the PJM. That's the first time that we've seen that. So reliability is an issue. Reliability is an attribute that you need to consider when you put your energy portfolio together, and this ban helps.
So lifting the moratorium is what they did. They'll get it on the governor's desk, and they also want to make sure they lift the moratorium so they can start working towards permits, because you got to get the federal government to oversee a lot of this as well. So we'll be watching that space closely. All right, so that's kind of some of the highlights. They did also advance a measure out of the House and Senate that deals with education, but not the Invest in Kids Act. We'll talk about that in a moment. They did pass a measure out of the House and Senate dealing with Chicago school boards and laying out the maps for an elected school board. So they got that across the finish line after some questions about what kind of ethics policies they'd implement. All right, so stay tuned. We'll talk about another education issue, the Invest in Kids Act. A lot talked about yesterday, but it looks like that the vote was not called. The bill was not called. The vote did not happen. So the Invest in Kids Act is sunsetting December 31st because state legislators are gone until January 16th. So we'll get to that next. Stay tuned. That's some of the dozens of families that have been showing up at the Illinois State Capitol for months on end when they've been on session in Springfield. You have kids chanting, call the bill, save my scholarship, but that didn't happen. Lawmakers called it all off and said we're going home until next year, and that happened with the end of fall veto session yesterday. So I was there on the ground for all 3 days this week and 3 days last week. Families were on location saying that they wanted their scholarship to be saved and for the Illinois House Speaker to, quote, call the bill. So they did not call the bill. And you've got the reaction, of course, from various areas, including the teachers' unions. And I want to pull this up on Twitter so you can see this. The reaction from the Illinois Education Association to the Invest in Kids Act, the act that allows for individuals to give private donations for exchange of a 75% Illinois income tax credit. Again, these are private dollars being donated to give to kids of lesser means so that their families can choose a school that better fits their needs, in a non-public school, for instance. So you had this since 2018. It's helped out thousands of families. 9,600 kids have this scholarship now, but with it set to sunset December 31st, question is what's going to happen to them, right? So obviously this was a big issue for the past year, if not 2 years, with families on location to sound off on this. But the teachers' unions opposed it. And here's a statement from the Illinois Education Association president on their Twitter account. It says, "It's a new day in Illinois. We are incredibly grateful to our lawmakers for choosing to end the voucher scheme known as Invest in Kids." They go on to say this program sent millions of taxpayer dollars to private schools and was created under the guise of helping students of color, but we know that their funds went predominantly to white students, they claim. They also go on to say the voucher system was intentionally created with a lack of oversight and accountability, leaving us with no data to measure its effectiveness. Public money belongs in public schools, and we are glad our lawmakers believe that too. 80% of our public schools in Illinois are underfunded. We need to focus on providing necessary funding to our public schools so that all children in Illinois continue to have access to high-quality public education. So again, the teachers union glad that this school choice program is going to end December 31st because the bill wasn't called, despite there being evidence that there was plenty of support. I don't know why they didn't just put it up on the board and put people on record. And if it failed, it failed. If it passed, it passed. Extend it. The governor said that he would pass an extension if it got on his desk. But again, some of the things that the teachers union points out here, number one, they say that it takes money away from public schools. Public schools have been getting $350 million extra for the past 5 years each year. So that's more than $2 billion that have been given to public schools. They get more than $10 billion each year from state funds, let alone the high property taxes that Illinois is known for across the state going to public schools. So clearly public schools getting a lot of money. The Invest in Kids program was not public dollars. It was private dollars. Now, if you want to make some kind of argument that the tax credit takes away from the tax funds, I guess, I don't know if I need to see that flow chart, but tax credits for an individual to give to families so they could choose education that best fits their students. That was the purpose of the Invest in Kids Act, but it's going to end December 31st because lawmakers didn't advance it. So the question about public money that the teachers union points out. Another issue that the teachers union points out that I want to also touch on, talks about how it was intentionally created with a lack of oversight and accountability, leaving us with no data to measure its effectiveness. From my understanding, the law spells out that the administration, the Pritzker administration, I believe it's either the Department of Human Services or some education arm, they're supposed to be surveying students and parents about the effectiveness of the Invest in Kids Act. And I don't think that's happened. So that's why you don't have data, is because apparently, according to my understanding, the Pritzker administration hasn't implemented those surveys to ultimately see how the program's been operating. And that gives, I guess, a way for the objectors to say, look, there's no data. So we don't know how effective this is. So that's an interesting point. I think it needs to be evaluated. But regardless, the program is going to sunset. And while you had a whole bunch of measures brought up on the final day of fall veto session that extended sunsets for a variety of things, one thing that wasn't extended was the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program. State Representative Dan Ugasti, he talks more about this and how they should have focused on the Invest in Kids program.
Very supportive of this bill. I believe it has great provisions. I believe it's something we need to do. It's missing two key items. It's missing, one, an extension of the mandatory sentencing for unlawful use of a weapon. At a time when our cities are being racked by people shooting at each other, we're about to get rid of mandatory sentencing. I'm not quite certain to what end, what we think it's going to do, how we think it's going to help. We have problems, untold problems right now with crime in our communities. hopefully, we'll think better of it and do something about it early next spring before too much more happens. As most important piece of legislation we could have done to help the children of the state of Illinois, to guarantee them a better future, to guarantee them a better opportunity. I don't see anything else in the calendar today that indicates we're going to call something to extend that bill either. It's a shame we're letting those kids down, but it's not our side of the aisle letting them down. We have 40 votes in support, and I know there's some in support over there, and I believe there's probably enough to carry it through. This bill should have been called. It should have been part of this omnibus.
And it wasn't. So the Invest in Kids Act obviously is not going to go anywhere now that the legislature is called off, and they're out until January 16th. Bill Howder, state representative, Republican. He's a doctor, a physician, now in the state house as a legislator. He's not used to this political wrangling that happens with outside lobby groups like teachers' unions putting pressure on lawmakers.
I stand to just congratulate the majority party who has stood firmly against the Invest in Kids program. Only one more day. Your unwavering commitment to kill this scholarship program that mostly benefits black and brown students, low-income families, and our most vulnerable population has been breathtaking. I mean, amazing, amazing. Only one more day of ignoring the emails, the demonstrations, the pesky kids in your office begging to save their scholarship, and it's all over, right? I don't really know how you did it, seemingly against everything. The voters, the polls, the kids, the facts, but you persevered through it all. I know I'm new to all this. I don't know the pressure of taking orders from special interest groups. So thank you for educating me on how this game works. At least someone's being educated in this entire mess. So again, I stand in absolute awe of your focus on equity in killing scholarships for all races and income levels. You persevered in taking an unpopular stand, and your unwavering loyalty to teachers' unions over kids is just admirable. In a few hours, kids will lose their scholarships in the middle of the school year. It'll be a tough few hours, but I'm confident you can do it if you keep the instructions, not the actions, mind you, the instructions of teachers union leader Stacey Davis Gates in mind. Hold on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek there, but somebody who is just new to the General Assembly highlighting some of the things that he says he's seen and how the outside pressure groups like the teachers unions put pressure on legislators. State Representative McLaughlin also sounding off on the lack of action for the Invest in Kids program.
I hope you know the personal faces of whose lives you've just destroyed. In my district, I'll include myself, 44. And I've heard from every single one of these families devastated by your inaction. You know, being proud doing this job is something that is more than about those on the outside that try to influence us. As we leave here today without doing something, I don't understand how you can be proud about this inaction. I myself was an underprivileged kid that got a scholarship to a high school. It changed my lives and the lives of 4 of my best friends, people of color, who went on to successful careers. This is personal to me, and it's personal to hundreds and thousands of families whose lives you've just put in terrible jeopardy, and you've destroyed their opportunity for an equitable education. Not something to be proud of, my friends.
So, again, the politics of this, Republicans said they had the votes. They believe they had the votes. All 40 House Republicans were on board. They say that there is 30 to 35 Democrats that would jump on with them to support this. Why it wasn't brought up on the board is unclear. The House Speaker ultimately controls what goes up on the board for a vote. But there were some Democrats out there who've been vocally in support of this. One has a bill to extend it. While it did chip away at some of the income tax credit provisions, it still would have extended it and kept it going. But that didn't advance. State Representative Cuellar, I believe the bill sponsor is. But you had others as well. State Representative Olicle, who, a Democrat from Skokie, stood up in support of the bill and said that they're going to continue to fight as a Democrat to get this across the finish line, even though it's going to sunset at the end of the year.
I'm a proud product of public schools. I committed my career to public service so I could continue to advance and protect the policies that allowed an immigrant family like mine to thrive in this country. The most important of that being a well-funded public school system. I strongly believe in public education system that is well-resourced for every child, regardless of the community they are born into. And this year, I, proudly with my colleagues, voted to fund early childhood education at $250 million. Put an additional $350 million into K-12 public education, for significant funding increases for our higher education institutions, and there's still more work to be done to fully fund our public school system. And I'm all in on doing that. And I commit here today that I'll vote for progressive revenue to close that gap and fully fund our public schools and public institutions. I also rise today to address the Invest in Kids program. The 16th district is home to more than 2,000 of the almost 10,000 low-income students on scholarship statewide. I've spent countless hours meeting with and speaking to the families of these students, and I've gotten to know them and the importance of this program to them. And I want to speak to those families. It looks like there may not be the requisite support to extend this program, or quite frankly, to make sure the rug isn't pulled out from under our students. And now as we go into the holiday season, these children in the gallery, thousands in my district and across the state, who had no agency of their own to decide what school district, what community they were born into, but had the chance to participate in this program, will be thrown into uncertainty. There's no guarantee that they'll be able to stay at the school that they may have grown to love and build community within, and may be thrown into a harmful transition. I may be one voice, one vote, and I'll continue to carry your concerns in this state capitol, and I will fight for the policies that ensure that you have the same chance as any to succeed in this state. Thank you.
So, again, they leave the chamber on the House side before even bringing up a vote for the Invest in Kids Act, and the Senate left as well without a vote for the Invest in Kids Act. Clearly, we'll see this bring up next year when they return, January 16th. House Minority Leader Tony McCombie reacting to the inaction of extending the Invest in Kids Act.
The funding is coming for the evidence-based funding regardless of this program. The governor and the budget continues to feed the evidence-based funding model. We continue to have the funds going into the evidence-based funding model. It's feeding the tiers. That is not an issue in this program, whether we have it or we don't. It is not.
And that's all for public schools. Public schools are going to continue getting that funding regardless if the Invest in Kids program is active or inactive.
Going to change that. This tax credit is not coming out of our education funding. So I could argue that is not taking away from the public education.
McCombie continued with some of the reaction.
Well, we certainly didn't discuss anything with ethics, and here we are.
Lack of action on all kinds of stuff from the past, veto session.
Well, we certainly didn't discuss anything with ethics, and here we are again. In the middle of a trial, and we're going to be approaching another trial in the spring, and nothing is addressed. So it blows my mind that we are not talking about that. So we have to discuss that.
So ethics also left on the cutting room floor, as well as the state's proposal from Democrats wanting to have the firearms owners facing domestic orders of protection to have their firearms confiscated by police rather than just handing the firearms over to a third party. That did not advance either for fall veto session. A whole host of things left on the cutting room floor for fall veto session. But obviously, I think a big one was the Invest in Kids program, where thousands of families are now going to have to seek out what their options are. Or they can continue to lobby and see if they can come back January 16th and see if lawmakers will bring up a reauthorization of the Invest in Kids Act to keep it going. State Representative, the House Minority Leader, Tony McCombie, says that she will fight for that, and hopefully there can be constructive conversations about all of that next year in the spring.
There's so many different ways that we could do things, but we have to be all together. There's different advocacy groups for it. I think they should be sitting together. I think Representative Guerrero's bill is certainly a good bill, a good start. She's a fierce advocate for it. I think to bring in the folks that are against it, I think they have valid concerns that they could bring forward and build something that could really be great for the kids, right? I think the concerns of the Black Caucus, where there's not funding going to those underserved schools, I think that's very valid. And I think that there should be some money put to those areas as well. So I think there is some things that we could do to make it a better program, a more effective program that could serve more students as well.
So there you go. That's your show for Friday. A review of all kinds of things happening at the state legislature. Fall veto session. It's done and over with. They won't be back until January 16th. We'll be there on the ground, track the latest. But be sure to stay tuned. Check out the channel, subscribe, like, follow. Programming note, I'm going to take a few days off next week. Might be hit or miss. I've got tons of other stuff I need to talk to you about, including police recruitment in other states. We'll track what happens with the gun and magazine ban litigation. We've also got next month, don't forget, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules is going to meet again. Plenty of other stuff to unpack from the past 3 days of fall veto session, so we'll get to that as well. But I do want to thank everyone for tuning in. You guys are making this show possible. I'm doing it from my home, so I greatly appreciate the support. And the subscriptions continue to blow my mind. I think I'm over like 8,500, if not 8,600. We'll get to 9,000, who knows. Check out the shirt, by the way. Trying to test out some merchandise. We'll see what happens, but, you know, it's all right. Got some stickers. We're testing all this stuff out, all right? So I promise we'll give you guys an opportunity to grab up some of this if you want. Got to get out of here. Have yourselves a wonderful holiday. Happy Veterans Day. And we'll see you back here soon, all right? I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out. It is Bishop on Air. Here on all your socials. YouTube, Facebook, X. You can find me on Instagram. But really, if you need to get a hold of me, just email me, bishoponair@gmail.com. All right. Have a great weekend, guys.